All right, so now we want to write data to MongoDB. So we have to do a couple of things. Some of this should be familiar, um, but it's good to do it again. We haven't done it much. So let's start in server.js. And so we need to add code here to read the .env file that we just created with like our username and password in it, and then to actually connect to the MongoDB server stuff. So we'll add a, after we create our Express app here, it doesn't really matter where we do this, we are gonna load our environment variables from the .env file into process env. This is exactly what we did back when we first learned about MongoDB. So we're going to require .env and assign that to a variable. And then we can do .env config, but we're going to specify the path as .env. So these are the same two lines of code that we had previously in our previous project to read in that secret. Because again, just to reinforce like best security practices, we do not want to put usernames and passwords in our code that we then commit to GitHub. That even if it's a private repository, we want to keep our secrets more secret. So .env file is a good solution to that. Now that we have the username and password, we can actually connect to the database. And this is a little bit different than what we did before. But we do want to connect to the database. And we're going to do that by creating a variable here. I'm going to call it connectDB. And I'm going to require, did it figure out the right path? Yeah. So inside of the server folder, there is a database folder. And inside there is something called connection.js, which I'll open in a moment. But this imports that JavaScript file, assigns the export to this variable connectDB, which is actually a reference to a function. So we're going to invoke that function to connect to the database. So line 20 obtains a reference to the function by importing the JavaScript file. Line 21 invokes that function, right? We still need to actually invoke the function. Importing it doesn't do anything. So again, we could put all the connection code like right in server.js, but I'm trying to keep server.js as short as possible and using other files, other JavaScript files to do the work. So if we just look at connection.js, it's already written for us. But I want to like show you what's different from before. We are not using the MongoDB node module anymore. We're now using a new module called Mongoose. So Mongoose is a node module that's a little bit more powerful, and it allows us to automatically like read and write JavaScript objects to a Mongo document without doing all that work ourselves, which is super nice. We basically define what's called the schema that maps the JavaScript object to the Mongo document, and then Mongoose does everything else. So last week or 2 weeks ago when we did this, we were requiring MongoDB. Now we're requiring Mongoose. It's very similar. We're still doing like a connect call here with the Mongo URI. We're just calling it now on our Mongoose object instead. And we're still printing out if we make a good connection, and we're still logging our errors. And if we can't connect to the database, the server exits, we're done. Like we can't do anything useful. And then here's where we're exporting that function that we've defined up here. It is an asynchronous function because it takes time to connect to a database. But in server.js, we're not putting in a wait here because we don't need to wait to connect to the database. Like it can happen on its own, and eventually that promise will get resolved. We can go on and like run the rest of our Express code to get our web server up and running. There's no point in waiting. All right, let's see where we're at. Um, we're going to create one more file and we're going to put it inside this model folder here. So I'm going to have you create the file and leave it empty for now. Entry.j. We're going to call it entry.js. And in the interests of time, um, you're going to copy and paste this in later. Um, we can do this at the start of class tomorrow. Um, this way, at the start of class tomorrow, you can copy and paste this and we can keep going. It's just tedious to type all of this. In hindsight, I probably should have just included it in your starter code. But to give you a brief overview, what we're doing here is we're defining a new Mongoose schema, which maps our JavaScript object to our Mongo document. And so what I'm saying here is that this object, our JavaScript object, will have a date property. And in MongoDB, it will be of type date because MongoDB is strongly typed, unlike JavaScript. This is going to be required. We must have a date. We'll have an email property, which is a string. It's required. We'll have a habit property, which is a string. It's required. We'll have a content property, which is a string, and that's required as well. Basically, the only thing here that's new compared to what they're entering on the form is the email, and we'll deal with that later. So once I define a new schema, I then associate that schema with the model named capital E entry. And a reference to that model is what this exports. So when we require entry.js and other files, we're going to get a reference to this entry model that we use to interact with entry objects in MongoDB. And you can copy and paste all of this tomorrow. I don't want you to take time to do it now. So yesterday, I we now all have should have copied entry.js. The link is on Canvas if you need it to my entry.js. Because we talked through this yesterday, which is fine. We don't need to type it all together. You may remember that all we're doing right now is just logging the entry, which is stored in the requests body in JSON. We need to actually now store that data in MongoDB. So we actually want to write the user's data to the database. So let's do that. We need to use that. Let's switch back here quick. We need to use this entry model from Mongoose, and we want to reference it from inside router. So whenever we need to reference something from one JavaScript file and another JavaScript file, we need to make sure we export it from the one file. So that's why we have module.exports equals entry here. And then we need to import it through a require command in the other file. So we're going to go up here and we're going to say const entry, which will be a reference to that Mongoose model, require ... because currently we're in the routes folder. So ... goes up one level in the folder hierarchy. So then we'd be in the server folder. We want to go inside the model folder, and inside the model folder is entry.js. So that will give us a reference to that Mongoose model. That's the first step. And then what we will do instead here, if we scroll down, we can get rid of just our simple log stuff. Here, I'll leave const entry. We're still going to use that. But now we're going to create a new entry object based on that model. So we're saying new entry. Entry refers to that Mongoose model that we required up at the top. And all right, that gets us close. We'll clean it up. All right, so in our entry object, the required fields are date, email, habit, and content. So we need to specify all of them. So in router.js, date will be rec.body.date. That works. Email, we'll do more with email later as we do authentication. For now, just hard code your email address here. And we'll do authentication stuff later. Um, Habit will be rec.body.habit. That looks good. Content rec.body.content. Sweet. So this code here creates a new entry Mongoose object from that entry model in Mongoose. So it's like we're constructing an object and we're specifying all four of the properties that are required to be specified. This is where Mongoose is super nice. Like we built this object based on the data stored in the request's body. And now it's one line of code to save this new object into our Mongoose database, or in Mongo database, sorry. That's an await call. Um, Actually, I don't know if we really have to do an await call, but we will. We'll do await entry dot save. So we simply call the save function on this new entry object we made. That communicates with the database. It immediately returns a promise. Once the database actually accepts the data and confirms that it's been stored in the database, the promise is resolved and we're good to go. We have a compiler error here. It's not happy with await. Why is that and how do we fix it? We've seen this before. Yeah, we do. We can only call an await. We can only use await inside of an async function. The parsing area here from ESLint's actually pretty good. Clues us in. So we need to go up here like we've done before and add async here to say that this arrow function we're defining is an asynchronous arrow function. Save. Let's see if it works. Okay, now one word of caution as we test this out. Your journal entries are being saved to the database and they're visible by everyone in class, including me. So let's keep all journal entries like school appropriate, okay? But let's also run this. So I'm gonna go to the run and debug menu. I'm gonna run the server. It has started, we've connected to the database. You'll notice that sometimes the MongoDB connected message is printed before the server started message and sometimes after. And sometimes after. And the reason for that is it's asynchronous, right? So we connect to the Mongo database when we connect to it, and it's not, it might happen before or after we actually start the server. So let me start my client, run that. There's the client. So I'm going to click on create entry. Please do the same. I'll click on today's date. Today, ooh, what habit of mine am I doing today? Choose what applies to you. Yes, question? Oh, I think you're right. All right. Um, Let me see if I have permission to add to the database. Probably not. Nope. Same thing. All right. I will fix this. And then we'll run it again.